Black family kicked off first class. Pilot resigned after seeing their credentials. Dr. James Mitchell adjusted his glasses as he checked the boarding passes on his phone one more time. Gate 23A, Flight 487 to Los Angeles first class, seats 3A, 3B, and 3C. Everything was in order, as it should be. At 48, with steady hands that had performed over 2,000 heart surgeries, James prided himself on precision and preparation. "Are you sure we're in first class, Dad?" asked Zoe, his 16-year-old daughter, scrolling through her own phone. "Tiffany's family always flies coach to visit her grandparents." "We're sure, sweetheart," said Olivia, James's wife of 20 years and a recently appointed federal judge. "Your father's giving the keynote at the Cardiac Symposium. The conference is covering the upgrade." James guided his family toward the priority boarding line, where a flight attendant with a pinched smile checked their boarding passes. Her name, tag read Karen Matthews. "Boarding passes, please," she said, her tone noticeably cooler than it had been with the previous passengers. James presented the digital passes on his phone. Karen scrutinized them longer than she had for others, her eyes flicking between the screen and their faces. "And can I see some ID for verification?" she asked. James noticed she hadn't requested identification from any of the previous first-class passengers, all of whom had been white, but he produced his driver's license without comment. Years of navigating predominantly white spaces had taught him which battles to fight. "These appear to be in order," Karen finally conceded, her tone suggesting the opposite. "Though it's unusual to have an entire family in first class," the comment lingered in the air like a stain. James felt Olivia stiffen beside him, her hand finding his in a gesture of solidarity they'd perfected over decades. "Not unusual for us," Olivia replied pleasantly, though James detected the careful restraint in her voice, the same tone she likely used when addressing contempt in her courtroom. As they made their way down the jet bridge, James squeezed Olivia's hand. This familiar dance of justifying their presence in spaces where black faces were rare had become a choreography they performed without discussion. The first-class cabin gleamed with leather seats and polished surfaces. James helped Zoe stow her backpack while Olivia arranged their carry-ons in the overhead compartment. They settled into their seats, James by the window, Zoe in the middle, Olivia on the aisle. "Can I get you a pre-departure beverage?" Kieran asked the white businessman across the aisle, her voice warm with customer service brightness. "Scotch, neat, please," he replied without looking up from his laptop. Karen efficiently delivered his drink, then passed by the Mitchells without offering the same service. James noted the omission without surprise. He'd long ago stopped expecting equal treatment, though each new instance still carried its small sting. 10 minutes later, as the cabin approached capacity, James observed Karen engaged in hushed conversation with another passenger, a middle-aged white woman who kept glancing toward their row with poorly disguised discomfort. Karen approached them with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Excuse me, but there seems to be a booking error with your seats." James pulled up the confirmation email he'd received 3 months earlier. "There's no error. We booked these seats in advance and received confirmation." "Nevertheless," Karen continued, "we need to reseat you in economy. Another passenger has concerns about the current seating arrangement." The implication hung in the recycled air of the cabin. James felt his heart rate increase slightly, the familiar heat of indignation warming his neck while his expression remained carefully neutral. "What specific concerns?" he asked, his voice low and measured. Karen's smile thinned further. "Let's not make this difficult. I can offer you economy comfort as compensation." Zoe looked up from her phone, suddenly alert to the tension. Olivia placed a protective hand on her knee. "I'm not moving my family from the seats we rightfully purchased," James stated, his voice calm but firm. Years of delivering difficult news to patients had taught him to maintain composure under pressure. Karen's smile vanished entirely. "Sir, as flight crew, I have the authority to reassign seats for the comfort of all passengers." "The comfort of all passengers, or just the white ones?" Olivia asked quietly, her judicial temperament evident in her measured tone. The question landed like a stone in still water. Several nearby passengers suddenly became very interested in their devices or the safety cards in their seatbacks. One woman, Asian, perhaps in her early 30s, watched the interaction with visible concern. "I'm not going to engage with accusations," Karen replied, voice rising slightly. "I need you to gather your belongings now." James pulled out his phone again. "I've already shown you our confirmed reservations. I'd like to speak with your supervisor before this escalates further." Karen's nostrils flared slightly. "One moment." As she walked away, Zoe leaned toward her parents. "Why is this happening?" she whispered, the bewilderment in her eyes making her look younger than 16. "It's happening because it's Tuesday, sweetheart," James replied, a private family shorthand. They developed years ago, meaning, "It's happening because we're black in America." The Asian woman across the aisle leaned toward them. "I've been in this exact seat on this exact flight 3 times this month. They've never reassigned anyone before. This isn't right." "Thank you," Olivia acknowledged with a small nod. Karen returned with a man in a dark uniform, airport security, and an older flight attendant whose badge identified him as the chief purser. "These passengers are refusing to comply with crew instructions," Karen informed them, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. The security officer's hand rested casually on his belt. "Sir, ma'am, I need you to deplane immediately." James felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. The familiar calculation ran through his mind: assert his rights and risk escalation, potentially exposing his family to trauma or even danger, or comply with the unjust demand and absorb another wound to their dignity. The Asian woman stood up. "Excuse me. I'm Emily Chen, a platinum member with over 2 million miles on this airline. These passengers have legitimate tickets. I've witnessed nothing that warrants this treatment." "Ma'am, please return to your seat," the purser said firmly. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns all of us when people are treated differently based on how they look," Emily replied, but her intervention was clearly being dismissed. James looked at Olivia, a silent conversation passing between them. Zoe's eyes had filled with tears she was determinedly blinking back. The decision crystallized. "We'll leave," James said quietly, "but I want it noted that we're doing so under protest, with valid first-class tickets and without any legitimate reason for removal." The purser's face remained impassive. "Your concerns are noted." As they gathered their belongings, James felt dozens of eyes on them. Some passengers looked uncomfortable, others curious, a few openly satisfied. No one else spoke up. The walk up the aisle felt interminable. James kept his back straight, his expression neutral, though inside he felt the familiar burn of humiliation mixed with anger. This controlled response to injustice was as much a part of his identity as his medical credentials, a survival skill honed since childhood. As they stepped onto the jet bridge, Zoe whispered, "Dad, why didn't you fight harder?" The question pierced him more deeply than she could know. The terminal bustled with activity, indifferent to the Mitchell family's humiliation. James guided his family toward the customer service desk, his jaw set with determination while his mind methodically catalogued details of the incident, times, names, specific statements. The surgeon in him approached even this injustice with clinical precision. "I'll handle this," Olivia said, her legal mind already framing arguments and citing precedents. 20 years on the bench had honed her ability to dissect unfair treatment with razor-sharp clarity. As they approached the desk, a tall man in a pilot's uniform emerged from a nearby hallway. He stopped abruptly, his expression shifting from casual observation to recognition. "Dr. Mitchell? James Mitchell from Boston General?" James turned, momentarily disoriented by the unexpected acknowledgement. "Yes?" "Captain David Reynolds," the pilot said, extending his hand. "You performed my brother Michael's valve replacement last year. Saved his life." The connection registered. Michael Reynolds, bicuspid aortic valve with severe regurgitation. How is he doing? Running marathons again, thanks to you. David smiled, then noted their luggage. Are you just arriving or departing? The question hung awkwardly. Zoe looked away, the fresh humiliation evident in her slumped shoulders. We were just removed from Flight 487, James explained carefully. There was a disagreement about our seating assignment. Something in James's tone made David's expression shift. Flight 487 to Los Angeles? That's not my route today, but… What happened exactly? Olivia stepped forward. We were removed from first class despite having valid tickets and confirmations. The flight attendant claimed there was a booking error, but it became clear the issue was that another passenger was uncomfortable sitting near us. Understanding dawned in David's eyes. He'd been a pilot for 20 years and had seen similar scenarios play out, though rarely with such distinguished passengers. Let me look into this, he said, his voice suddenly professional. Which gate? 23A, James replied. But we don't want to cause trouble. This is trouble that already exists, David interrupted gently. Give me a moment. He stepped away, speaking quietly into his company phone. James watched as the pilot's expression darkened during the conversation. When David returned, his face was grim. I've spoken with ground operations. There was no booking error. Karen Matthews has had 2 previous complaints about similar issues with passengers of color. Olivia's courtroom composure momentarily faltered. So this is a pattern. One the airline has apparently been ignoring, David confirmed. He hesitated before continuing. Judge Mitchell, yes, I know who you are. I'm deeply sorry this happened. Especially to you, Dr. Mitchell. After what you did for my family. Zoe looked up at the pilot, her eyes sharp with sudden interest. What are you going to do about it? The directness of the teenager's question hung in the air. It was the essential question. What happens after the recognition of injustice? David squared his shoulders. Something I should have done a long time ago. He excused himself again, this time walking with purpose toward the airline's operations office. Through the glass walls, they could see him engaged in what appeared to be an increasingly heated discussion with several administrators. What do you think he's doing? Zoe asked. James watched the exchange thoughtfully. Something consequential, I suspect. 15 minutes later, David emerged from the office, his face set in lines of both regret and resolution. Captain David Reynolds had never considered himself an activist. 20 years in aviation had taught him to prioritize protocol, to trust the established procedures that kept planes safely in the air. But standing in the operations office, hearing the dismissive explanations from management about the Mitchell family incident, something fundamental shifted in his understanding of responsibility. It was a simple misunderstanding, the operations manager had insisted. These things happen. They happen disproportionately to passengers of color, David countered, his voice tight with controlled anger. That family includes one of the top cardiothoracic surgeons in the country and a federal judge. The sudden silence had told him everything about the airline's priorities. Concern not for justice but for potential liability, now that they realized who they had mistreated. Now, approaching the Mitchells again, David carried himself with the decisive bearing that had guided him through countless flights through turbulent skies. The airline is offering to rebook you in first class on the next available flight, with additional compensation, he informed them. They're suddenly very concerned about your satisfaction. James noted the bitter edge in the pilot's voice. And if we weren't a surgeon and a judge, what then? Exactly, David replied. Which is why I just tendered my resignation, effective immediately. Olivia's eyes widened. Captain Reynolds, that's an extreme step. Are you certain? David nodded. Firmly. I included specific details about today's incident and the pattern it represents. I also made it clear that I cannot in good conscience fly for an organization that allows such treatment of passengers based on race. Zoe stared at him with a mixture of awe and confusion. Won't you lose your pension or something? A small smile crossed David's face. Some things cost more than money, young lady. James studied the pilot carefully. Why, you hardly know us. David considered the question, his gaze steady. When my brother was on your operating table, you didn't know him either. But you gave him your absolute best because that was your duty as a surgeon. This is mine as a human being. The terminal announcement system chimed overhead, announcing, boarding for another flight. The ordinary airport soundtrack continued around their extraordinary moment. What happens now? James asked. My resignation will be processed. The airline will try to handle it quietly. David checked his watch. But I've already emailed my statement to several industry contacts and journalists. The attention should help ensure the airline addresses this properly, rather than burying it. Olivia's legal mind quickly assessed the implications. You've potentially sacrificed your career. I've redirected it, David corrected gently. Several airlines have better records on these issues. I'll find my way. As if on cue, David's phone buzzed with an incoming call. I should take this. It's likely HR wanting to discuss a severance package. He extended his hand to James. It was an honor to meet you under any circumstances, Dr. Mitchell. I just wish they had been better ones. After David stepped away, the Mitchell family stood in momentary silence, processing what had just happened. Did he really just quit his job because of us? Zoe asked, her voice small with wonder. Not because of us, James corrected, watching David's retreating figure. Because of what was right, Olivia squeezed her husband's hand. It shouldn't take someone sacrificing their career to prove our humanity matters. No, James agreed, but I'm grateful when it happens anyway. Breaking. Veteran pilot resigns over alleged racial discrimination against prominent black family. The headline glared from James's tablet 3 days later. He sat in his home office. The Los Angeles Cardiac Symposium now concluded after his successful keynote address. They had eventually reached their destination on a different airline, but the incident had followed them through social media, news cycles, and a stream of interview requests. Dad. Zoe appeared in the doorway, her school backpack slung over one shoulder. There's a camera crew outside again. James sighed, setting aside the tablet. Stay away from the windows, they'll leave eventually. Zoe didn't move. My history. Teacher asked if you'd come speak to our class about what happened. The request hung between them. James studied his daughter's face, seeing both uncertainty and determination there. What do you think I should do? He asked her. I think you should tell your story, she replied without hesitation. People at school keep talking about it anyway, but they don't understand what it really means. From the kitchen, Olivia called. Out. The airline CEO is on line 1. Third call this week. James felt the weight of decisions pressing on him from all sides. The Cardiac Symposium had been a professional triumph. His research on heart valve procedures in minority populations had been received with acclaim. Yet that success now seemed overshadowed by an incident that reduced him once again to his skin color rather than his accomplishments. Tell him I'll call back, James replied to Olivia, then turned to Zoe. What don't your classmates understand? Zoe considered this seriously. They think it's about one bad flight attendant or one good pilot. They don't see the pattern. Her perception struck him. At 16, she already recognized what many adults refused to acknowledge, that individual incidents connected to form the tapestry of systemic racism. Later that evening, as James and Olivia prepared dinner, the doorbell rang. On their doorstep stood Emily Chen, the passenger who had attempted to advocate for them on the flight. I hope you don't mind, she said when James opened the door. I found your address through the Boston Medical Directory. I needed to apologize. James invited her in, curious. You have nothing to apologize for. You tried to help. Emily shook her head. Not enough. I should have done more. Recorded it, joined you in deplaning something. Olivia brought tea to the living room. Most people did nothing at all. That's the problem, Emily replied. I teach sociology at Columbia. I lecture about bystander intervention, yet, when the moment came, she left the thought unfinished. The conversation shifted to the aftermath. Captain Reynolds had already received offers from 2 competing airlines. The flight attendant had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, and the Airline had announced a comprehensive review of its customer service training. Will it change anything? Emily asked as she prepared to leave. James considered the question carefully. Change rarely comes all at once, but every time someone like Captain Reynolds takes a stand, it creates possibility. After Emily departed, James found Zoe in her bedroom, working on what appeared to be a presentation. "What's that?" he asked. She turned her laptop screen toward him. The title slide read, "Everyday Racism and Active Allyship, What We Can All Do." "For my social studies class," she explained. "I'm using what happened to us as a case study." James felt a complex mixture of pride and sadness. Pride in his daughter's resilience and insight. Sadness that these were lessons she had to learn so young. "I think," he said carefully, "I will accept your teacher's invitation after all." 6. Months later, James stood at a podium in a hotel ballroom filled with medical professionals. The annual Physician Leadership Conference had asked him to deliver the closing address, not about cardiac procedures, but about his experience and its aftermath. "Medicine taught me precision," James began, surveying the attentive faces. "It taught me to identify patterns, to recognize when something is functioning as designed, even when that design is flawed." In the front row sat Captain David Reynolds, now employed by a competitor airline, where he headed their newly formed inclusion training program. Beside him was Olivia, who had recently been appointed to a judicial committee examining bias in the court system. Zoe couldn't attend. She was leading a student symposium at her school on recognizing and addressing everyday discrimination. "What happened to my family on that flight was not an aberration," James continued. "It was a system, functioning as designed, a design that automatically questions the legitimacy of Black excellence and belonging." He detailed not just the incident, but its ripple effects, the airline's eventual policy changes, the industry-wide examination of discriminatory practices, the thousands of messages his family had received from others who had experienced similar treatment. "Captain Reynolds is often called heroic for his decision," James acknowledged, nodding toward David. "And it was indeed an act of moral courage. But the true measure of progress isn't individual heroism. It's creating systems where such heroism isn't necessary because dignity is the baseline expectation for all." After the speech, during the reception, a young Black medical resident approached James hesitantly. "Dr. Mitchell, your address was powerful," she said, "but I struggle with this daily. How do you maintain your professional focus when these things happen?" James considered her question carefully. "I remember that my presence in these spaces isn't just about me. Every surgery I perform, every medical advancement I contribute to, creates possibilities for others who look like us." He watched understanding dawn in her eyes, the recognition of purpose beyond personal success that had sustained him through decades of navigating predominantly white institutions. Later, as the event concluded, James, Olivia, and David shared a quiet dinner at a nearby restaurant. "The policy changes are being implemented across all their routes now," David informed them. "It's not perfect, but it's progress." "Progress requires vigilance," Olivia noted, "and people willing to use their privilege and position when it matters." James nodded, thinking about the young resident's question. "It also requires hope. Not naive optimism, but the stubborn insistence that better is possible." As they parted ways outside the restaurant, David asked, "Would you do anything differently?" "Knowing what you know now," James considered this, "I would still be exactly who I am, a Black surgeon who expects equal treatment. The question isn't what we should change about ourselves, but what we must change about our systems." Walking back to their hotel, James and Olivia passed their reflection in a storefront window. Two accomplished professionals, whose expertise had proved insufficient protection against bias. Yet tonight they walked with shoulders unburdened by the weight of silent accommodation. Some battles changed you even when you appeared to lose them. Some victories came not in the moment of conflict, but in its long, transformative aftermath.